people that have higher activation levels in the left prefrontal cortex and their left frontal cortex tend to be more flexible in their thinking, be more optimistic, have a lot of gratitude. So there's something there. And what Dr. Jeff Tarrant has done and his group at Story Up is actually create this neurofeedback protocol paradigm where you put on a set of virtual reality goggles and progress through the game. So it's neurofeedback, just like you were looking at the screen, but you're actually in a VR headset. And in order to progress through the game, you elicit different feelings of gratitude and kindfulness to actually increase the frontal lobe activation of the brainwave amplitude in your left frontal lobe to create that asymmetry between the frontal lobes. And that's how you actually progress through the game. So you're actually practicing how to do that. Hey, welcome to Techforpsych, where we combine the latest neurotechnology with ancient wisdom to supercharge your brain. I'm Dr. Cody Rall, your medical doctor confidant. So today we're talking about different types of meditation and how you can use those to meet specific needs, and also use neurofeedback technology to enhance different types of brainwaves that actually meet those needs. So it's this overall comprehensive way of supercharging your brain. So where this is coming from is I just read this book by Dr. Jeff Tarrant. It's called Meditation Interventions to Rewire Your Brain. Very good book, awesome book. And I'm seeing a lot of similarities between different books that I have reviewed on this channel recently, to include the Altered Traits book by Richard Davidson and Daniel Goleman, the Chuladasa Mind Illuminated book, and even the Stealing Fire book by Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler. So what we're seeing are these different biomarkers in the brain that signify different things like anxiety, depression, or even just high-level meditation practices like empathy and understanding to enhance our brains. So what's going on? So Dr. Jeff Tarrant talks about 4 different types of meditation that he uses in his neurofeedback practice to actually help people reach new levels. So where this mirrors what's happening in actually mental health research right now is called RDoC. So Dr. Tom Insel, who I interviewed on this channel, was the head of National Institute of Mental Health for 13 years at NIH. And what he put forth was the RDoC principle, which is research domain criteria. And the reason he put that forth is that mental health, the diagnostic manual has been around for many, many years now. And really, it goes off of subjective criteria of what people report. So if you were to diagnose someone with major depressive disorder, they'd have to have 2 weeks of low mood, low energy, maybe even suicidal thinking, listing all those different types of criteria. The problem is that's not very accurate. You can ask someone how they're feeling, and they might have difficulty expressing how they're feeling, and it's not really based on objective measurements, which is how every other scientific field has progressed within the last couple hundred years. Was actually like objective measures of reality rather than relying on people's interpretation of that reality, because people's interpretation of reality can become very warped and is not reproducible. So you actually have to measure physical things like weight or like gravity or light, anything that can be measured by instruments. So what Dr. Tom Insel was talking about is that we need to be using our technology and our instruments to measure things in people to actually come up with the diagnoses for mental health. And that would be like genetics, brain scans, or any other biomarkers like stress hormones in the body, anything else that you get your hands on to actually be reproducible between different people to actually create diagnoses. For example, like with diabetes, you would be measuring people's blood sugar levels and using that to diagnose diabetes. There's also something called hemoglobin A1C, where the hemoglobin molecules get glycosylated, and you can use that to determine if people have had higher blood sugar levels for extended periods of time, being a more reliable diagnostic indicator of diabetes. So what you want to be doing is using brain scans, all the things I've been talking about on this channel, to include functional MRI, mapping, big data, genetic studies, in order to diagnose different categories. And the reason why that's important is that if you don't get your diagnosis right, you're not going to get your treatment right. You can't prove that treatments actually work if you have a heterogeneous population that is in something like a randomized controlled trial. So what's happening with meditation now is people like Jeff Tarrant, people like Richard Davidson, these are pioneers in the research field that are trying to use different scientific measures to understand what's happening in meditation. one of the things that was in altered traits was that we saw that people with different years of meditation experience had altered traits. Their brains were literally rewired over the decades to express different things. And one of the things that you found in Buddhist monks is like this huge gamma wave synchronization and increased amplitude that signified that they actually had their brains functioning at a different level than the average population. So what Dr. Jeff Tarrant has done is talked about different types of meditation that he uses in his neurofeedback practice to target different things. These 4 categories he listed off as focus, mindfulness, open heart, and quiet mind. And so I'm going to go over these different categories, talk about the different biomarkers that we see in them, and also talk about correlations that I see in these different books that I've been reviewing lately, to include the Altered Traits book and the Mind Illuminated book. So the first one that's very obvious is focus. I think honestly that's what everybody should start out with talking about when it comes to meditation, neurofeedback, and combining the two to actually enhance your meditative practice. Because obviously when you have your eyes open, you're focusing around the room, focusing wherever you are. Your eye is doing the moving, right? And that's changing your focus. But when you have your eyes closed during meditation, you can change your focus as well. It's almost like you have like a third eye or something, right? Because you could be focusing on your breath, you could be focusing on the tip of your nose, you could be focusing on feeling loving kindness energy flowing into your body and filling you up from the toes all the way up to your head and your face. All these different practices that you can change and shift by being aware of where your focus is. And there are different neurocircuits in your brain that change your focus. One of the big ones is the reticular activation system, which sort of routes the brain's attention to whatever you're paying attention to. So these different focus neurocircuits in the brain can be trained. And really where that comes into neurofeedback is the traditional history of neurofeedback, which is one of the crown jewels of neurofeedback is to treat children with ADHD, which is awesome, right? You don't have to put the kid that's having trouble focusing on stimulants like Adderall or Ritalin and train them to just have better focus in the classroom. In my opinion, it's a much more healthy way of going about it, and actually empowers the kid to be able to learn that they can learn how to do different skills like focus. And one of the biomarkers that Jeff talks about is called the theta-beta ratio. So theta is a lower brainwave frequency than beta. So theta is one of the lower frequency ones. So delta is like if you're asleep, but then theta is the next one up. And if you have too much theta within your brainwave frequency profile, it's an indication that there's under activation of the brain. So the FDA has actually approved this device, which is surprising to me, that measures theta-beta ratio in children to help diagnose ADHD. So here we have like a device that's actually one of the first devices that I'm aware of that's using biomarkers to diagnose a mental health diagnosis, which is ADHD, which is awesome. So in neurofeedback, what you would do is you would have, of course, the EEG leads on the child, and now people are using the Muse headband with MindLift to be able to do this as well. You're having the child look at a screen, and the game is going to respond to what brainwave frequencies they are actually changing in their own brain through operant conditioning. And what you reward them with is reducing the theta-beta ratio, meaning less theta in the brain, meaning the brain is sort of waking up and learning how to focus properly, and rewarding different low beta frequencies like SMR over the motor cortex. So these are, you inhibit the slower brain waves and you reward the higher brain waves, and their brain is sort of shifting itself and learning how to do that. And all the neurons are firing and they learn how to do that, and then myelin sheathing gets wrapped around those neural circuits and they become stronger. You can actually see that on DTI imaging, which I think is going to be sort of next level stuff for human society and learning, is that we're going to actually be able to see that fatty tissue being wrapped around axons, making those connections stronger in brains and rewiring the brain. That's literally the wiring of the brain that you can see on neuroimaging today. And hopefully, as neuroimaging comes down in cost with devices like the near-infrared spectroscopy devices, we're actually going to be seeing brain scans be applied more to everyday life to be able to see how our brains are responding to learning. As far as biomarkers for mindfulness, so we talked about getting out of the default mode network, but you can only really see that with functional MRI imaging. For EEG, actually looking at the brainwave frequencies, which is more accessible to people using the Muse headband and MindLift applications, what we see is more theta activity in the frontal lobe. Okay, so actually what happens is that you get something called hypofrontality, meaning that your frontal lobe gets out of the way of the rest of your brain, because your frontal lobe is making all these decisions, but it also makes you very rigid and decision making, and you don't want to be able to be doing that if you try to get into flow state. So the frontal lobe kind of quiets down. That's why you see more of these theta waves in the frontal lobe. So mindfulness actually calms down the frontal lobe, and you see more theta waves come up out of it. So that's like another biomarker that you can shoot to use for people trying to practice mindfulness. And how that plays into meditation is that in different types of meditation, like Vipassana meditation, often what you're doing is focusing on your breath, right? If you focus on your breath and you sort of shut everything else out, it's going to evoke these different brainwave patterns out of your brain and these different subjective experiences that are going to make you really enjoy meditation. It's going to sharpen your focus. It's going to reduce your anxiety. It's actually even going to cause these energetic surges in your body called jhana that Culadasa talks about, that are very pleasurable and enjoyable and make you want to actually do meditation. And that's what I've been doing with my clients, is using neurofeedback to elicit those responses. You know, if you enjoy doing something, you're going to be much more likely to do it. That's why so many people have difficulty with meditation. They actually have not experienced these awesome surges of energy or the quiet calm that comes after them. Really, they just sit down and try to focus on their breath, but then their mind gets distracted, they get frustrated, and then, they give up meditation. That's what Jeff Tarrant talked about in this book quite a bit, is that someone that has problems with ADHD, maybe you shouldn't be doing a breath-focused meditation to begin with. Maybe you should be doing more of a mindfulness practice, because if you do a breath-focused practice, they're just going to get frustrated and give up. But there's different types of meditation that he describes in his book that you can encourage people to do that are a little bit easier to sort of gain momentum, gain experience, and gain confidence to be able to do a more regular meditation practice. What Culadasa talks about is the difference between attention and awareness. It's almost like, you have a camera and a camera lens. You can change the focal length so that you can be very focused on an object in the foreground, but the background blurs out, or you can change the focal length on the lens so that everything comes into focus at the same time. But in order to have the sharpest focus, you'd have to blur out the background, right? So that's the difference between attention and awareness. So you can dilate the attention and awareness. And in meditation, you can dilate the attention and awareness as well. You can be very, very focused on the tip of your nose and ignore everything else, or you can sort of back off a little bit, dilate the perception, and have more of a general awareness of everything else while keeping your attention on the nose, on the tip of the nose as well. So that's, to me, the difference between focus and the mindfulness components, because mindfulness is pulling back and just being mindful of all your surroundings. And that's a different type of meditation that Jeff talks about, is like, if people have ADHD, maybe you shouldn't be using just the focus neurofeedback all the time, or the focus meditation. You should be encouraging mindfulness meditation. So it's become very common in hospital circles that have groups for mindfulness with people that have anxiety or depression to actually learn meditation through mindfulness. And the idea is that you're more awake and paying attention to things during the day. So if you go on a walk, you're just noticing the colors of the trees, you're noticing the wind rustling, you're noticing the different smells, the different sensations. It's sort of like waking your brain up to your surroundings. And from a biological perspective, what we're seeing is that it gets people out of something called the default mode network. And I've talked about the default mode network a lot on this channel. It's the brain circuitry that kicks in when you're having self-referential thought. So all your problems in your life, the things that you have to do, the things that you worry about, when you're worrying, that's when the default mode network kicks in. And this idea of mindfulness is redirecting your attention to your surroundings so that you're not inside your head all the time, you're enjoying life. And also it's really good for flow state, because if you imagine these extreme athletes, what they want to do is get out of their default mode network and into their muscle memory. And in order to do that, they want to develop more mindfulness to get into that flow state. And that's what they talk a lot about in Stilling Fire in that book series, is that you want to get out of your default mode network and into your present situation so that you have higher athletic performance, but also very applicable to job performance, academic performance, anything else that you would imagine getting outside of your head and into the moment actually helps. And that's what the Halo Neuroscience, Halo Sport 2 that I'm going to review here on the channel can help do as well, is get people into flow state by priming the brain. So there's different neuro devices that are coming out that are going to help enhance that as well. But so that's the mindfulness component, is getting out of the default mode network. So we talked about focus, meditation, and neurofeedback that would be really good for people with something like ADHD. We talked about mindfulness meditation, getting outside of your head can be really good for people with anxiety. What about people that are suffering from depression or just don't seem to get much enjoyment out of life? Well, Dr. Jeff Tarrant talks about open heart meditation, meaning the loving kindness meditation, where you're really exercising that muscle of having gratitude and empathy and these different things that are going to release a ton of neurotransmitters in your brain to actually make you feel like you're enjoying your life here. Of course, morally that's good, but also biologically good for people to experience, because why would you stick around if you felt like life wasn't worth living? And gratitude and thankfulness and all these amazing things really are very powerful exercises to enjoy life more. And what's amazing is that we can actually see different biomarkers in the brain in regards to EEG to correlate with depression. And what Dr. Jeff Tarrant talks about is there's actually a asymmetry in the two frontal lobes. So people with depression tend to have lower activation patterns in their left frontal lobe. So one of the amazing things in that Altered Traits book that Richard Davidson and Daniel Goleman talked about was when they flew these Buddhist monks from Tibet to University of Madison, Wisconsin to take a look at their brains through brain imaging and EEG work, is that they were able to elicit this very powerful gamma wave response, particularly in the left frontal lobe. So when they're practicing this open heart, loving kindness meditation, they're eliciting all these different things to include gamma wave synchronization over the entire brain, but also very powerful amplitudes of brainwave frequencies in the left frontal lobe. And what we see is that people that are depressed, have locked in thinking, tend to be negative and pessimistic, have lower levels of brainwave activation in their left frontal lobe and higher levels of brainwave activation in their right frontal lobe. And it amazed me to read and learn about that, because I had actually heard about that in different circles, meaning that when you look at the neurology field of strokes, so strokes are terrible, right? It's like either the blood flow gets cut off from the brain and the tissue dies that way, or you get a hemorrhagic stroke where like a blood vessel bursts open and you get a brain bleed and kills all the tissue around that. And that's where you see people that get paralyzed or their entire personalities change from that terrible thing happening. What you actually see is if someone has a stroke in their left frontal lobe, they are more likely to become depressed, but if they get a stroke in their right frontal lobe, they're more likely to become manic. And that was actually a question that would be often asked in my medical training and on our boards. So if it's actually incorporated into board questions, usually it's got a lot of evidence behind it and has been accepted by the general medical community. So we know that people that have strokes on different sides of their frontal lobe brains have different outcomes. And we know that with transmagnetic stimulation, that a lot of the protocols have been designed around stimulating the left prefrontal cortex. So there's something there, like higher levels of activation in the left prefrontal cortex seem to elicit, or help people get out of depression. And people that have higher activation levels in the left prefrontal cortex and their left frontal cortex tend to be more flexible in their thinking, be more optimistic, have a lot of gratitude. So there's something there. And what Dr. Jeff Tarrant has done and his group at Story Up is actually create this neurofeedback protocol paradigm where you put on a set of virtual reality goggles and progress through the game. So it's neurofeedback, just like you're looking at a screen, but you're actually in a VR headset. And in order to progress through the game, you elicit different feelings of gratitude and kindfulness to actually increase the frontal lobe activation of the brainwave amplitude in your left frontal lobe to create that asymmetry between the frontal lobes, and that's how you actually progress through the games. You're actually like practicing how to do that. And that's definitely something we can do with Muse and Mindlift as well. So loving kindness meditation, it's exactly what, maybe not exactly, but it's very much what the Buddhist monks tell us that they are doing in their meditative practices to get that altered trait, their brains literally rewiring themselves over 20,000 hours of meditation and meditation retreat. Hopefully we'll be able to speed that up with neurofeedback. That's actually, a lot of people like Dr. Jeff Tarrant and the altered trait people, myself, it's all sort of what we're working on in this community to be able to enhance those brainwaves so that we actually learn meditation faster and, protect ourselves from this overstimulated environment that we're living in. Last area to cover is called quiet mind in Jeff Tarrant's book, and it's this idea of quieting the mind and becoming like more self-transcendent. And I don't know if this is exactly what Jeff meant, but it reminds me of what Tula Dasa talks about in The Mind Illuminated, which is experiencing jhana, experiencing shamatha. These are states of being where you forget yourself. So a lot of hypofrontality in there, meaning the frontal lobe just shuts off. You feel very connected to the universe. You are experiencing things like energetic waves called jhana. A lot of people experience this with advanced prowess in Vipassana meditation. Also, TM, Transcendental Meditation, aims for this by using a mantra so that you focus on the mantra and then everything else in your brain sort of quiets down, and then you just become raptured by the current moment and the mantra and transcend. I think of it as like cave diving almost. You go deeper and deeper into the meditative state and you experience these states of mind that would almost be like coming into a glorious underwater cave cavern. Or you could imagine it, taking off into space, whatever else, analogy you want to use. But, that's what these Buddhist monks describe, is they just enter this state where it's just complete empathy, complete love, complete relaxation, and is really just the self-transcendent state that we'd be shooting for. And in my mind, all these different practices like the mindfulness, the focus, the loving kindness, those are all tools and prerequisites to be able to make the last one happen, which is that awesome state of being. And again, what we see in Buddhist monks is that huge gamma wave synchronization across their entire brain that would signify entering a state like that. And I think that states like that are so rare that people would have difficulty gathering enough data to be able to determine more biomarkers for it, but people are definitely working on it. And what's so great about things like the Muse headband is democratizing this neurofeedback technology is that we can get a lot more brain data from people, so that people that are very advanced meditators, we can see what's actually going on in the brain and help it apply it to our meditative practices. People that are maybe not necessarily expert meditators like myself. I'm not considering myself an expert meditator, some kind of in between. But regardless, what's so great about people like Dr. Krieg Olsen, who I interviewed on this channel, is that you can take the Muse headband to the Tibetan monks. You can take this technology to different environments so you can really see what the brain is doing and gather that data to help everybody improve their own minds. And that's what we're trying to do on this channel. So thanks so much for listening. I know there was a lot of information in this video. If you guys are interested in doing coaching with me, I'm starting up a cohort program. We're gonna have groups of people going through using the meditation Mindlift program to enhance their meditative practices, but also be doing group calls so that we can all talk about the experience and learn from each other. So if you're interested in that, head to www.techforpsych.com/coaching. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. I really enjoy interacting with everybody on this channel, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks.